Why do some people seem to achieve so much effortlessly while the rest of us feel like every single day is a grueling battle against our own willpower? We wake up with the best of intentions. We tell ourselves that today is the day we will finally hit the gym, finally start that project, or finally eat better, and for a day or two we do. But then it gets hard, we get tired, the inspiration fades, and we fall right back into the old patterns. We blame ourselves, we say, I just don't have enough discipline. But science tells us something completely different. The truth is, the most successful people in the world do not have a superpower called discipline. What they have is an understanding of how the human brain actually works. They understand that discipline is a finite resource. It is like a battery. Every time you force yourself to do something you don't feel like doing, that battery drains. If you rely on discipline alone to get you through your day, you will fail because by 500 p.m., your battery is completely empty. The secret to sustainable long-term success isn't about trying harder. It is about building a routine that transforms conscious discipline into automatic habit. It is about moving the heavy lifting from the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for willpower, to the basal ganglia, the primitive part of your brain that handles automatic behaviors like brushing your teeth or driving a familiar route. When a behavior becomes automatic, it stops draining your battery. It becomes who you are, not just something you do. So how do we build a routine that is truly bulletproof? It starts with understanding the anatomy of a habit. Every single habit we have, good or bad, follows a simple three-step neurological loop: the cue, the routine, and the reward. The cue is the trigger that tells your brain to go into automatic mode. The routine is the behavior itself. And the reward is the chemical payoff, usually a hit of dopamine that tells your brain, hey, this felt good. Let's remember to do this again next time. Most people fail to build a routine because they focus entirely on the routine itself. They say, I'm going to read for an hour every night, but they don't design a clear cue and they don't celebrate a reward. To make a routine bulletproof, you have to anchor it to something that already exists. This is what scientists call habit stacking. You do not just decide to meditate. You decide that after you pour your first cup of coffee in the morning, which is an established cue, you will sit on the couch and meditate for 5 minutes. You attach the new behavior to an anchor that is already automatic. Furthermore, you must drastically lower the barrier to entry. We often think big results require massive heroic leaps. They don't. They require tiny, boring, consistent steps. If you want to start a gym routine, your goal shouldn't be a 2-hour workout. Your goal should be just putting on your running shoes and walking out the front door. Optimize for the starting line, not the finish line. Because once you start, the friction disappears. When you align your daily actions with the natural chemistry of your brain, something incredible happens. The things that used to require massive effort start to happen on autopilot. You stop fighting yourself. You stop wondering if you have what it takes. We don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. When you build a system based on science rather than sheer willpower, you stop casing success. Success simply becomes the automatic byproduct of who you are every single day. 5 keynotes of the speech: willpower is a finite resource. Discipline acts like a battery that drains throughout the day. Relying solely on willpower for daily tasks guarantees eventual burnout and failure. The basal ganglia shift. True success happens when conscious effort is moved from the decision-making part of the brain to the basal ganglia, turning high-friction actions into automatic, low-energy habits. The habit loop mechanism: every lasting behavior is driven by a loop consisting of a clear cue trigger, the routine's action, and a reward dopamine payoff. To change a routine, you must manage the cue and reward. Habit stacking via anchors. The most effective way to build a new routine is to stack it directly on top of an already established automatic daily habit, drastically reducing the friction of starting. Optimize for the starting line to overcome initial resistance, lower the barrier to entry so significantly that it is impossible to say no. Focus entirely on simply starting the action rather than the magnitude of the entire task. The human mind operates on a deeply flawed assumption. We believe that our ability to make good choices, resist temptations, and push through difficult tasks is a simple matter of character. We tell ourselves that if we just care enough, if we are strong enough, or if we want success badly enough, we can simply force ourselves to execute our goals day in and day out. This perspective treats discipline like a muscle that can be infinitely flexed or a moral compass that never wavers. However, cognitive science paints a fundamentally different and far more sobering picture of human nature. Willpower is not a reflection of your character. It is a strictly finite biological resource. It behaves exactly like a battery. Every single time you make a decision, restrain an impulse, or force yourself to focus on a challenging task, you draw power from that battery. To understand why so many well-intentioned routines collapse by the evening, we have to look at the mental tax of modern life. From the moment your alarm rings, the draining of your willpower battery begins. When you resist the urge to hit the snooze button, you drain a little bit of power. When you choose a healthy breakfast over a sugary pastry, you drain a bit more. When you sit in traffic and consciously force yourself to stay calm instead of reacting in anger, the battery drops further. The trap of the modern environment is that we are constantly forced to exert cognitive control over our primal desires and distractions. By the time you sit down at your desk to tackle your most important project of the day, your battery has already experienced significant depletion. This biological reality explains the phenomenon known in psychology as ego depletion. The brain's prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive functioning, logical reasoning, and impulse control, requires an immense amount of metabolic energy to function. Every act of self-regulation consumes glucose and mental energy. Because this energy capacity is strictly limited, your capacity for discipline fluctuates wildly depending on the time of day and the volume of decisions you have already made. This is precisely why the vast majority of dietary relapses, emotional outbursts, and lapses in productivity occur in the late afternoon and evening. It is not that you suddenly became a less disciplined person at 1600 p.m. It is that your prefrontal cortex ran out of fuel. Expecting yourself to consistently make optimal, high discipline choices when your mental battery is running on empty is a physiological impossibility. Relying solely on sheer willpower to carry you through a demanding daily routine is a statistical guarantee of eventual burnout and failure. When you try to build a life based on constant self-enforcement, you are essentially trying to run a marathon by sprinting the entire time. You might survive the first mile or two through pure adrenaline and inspiration, but eventually biology wins. The friction of constantly fighting your own brain creates profound mental fatigue. When the battery dies, you do not just stop working toward your goals. You actively revert to your most deeply ingrained, low-energy baseline behaviors, which usually comfort-seeking, passive, and counterproductive to your long-term success. The realization that willpower is a finite resource should completely change how we design our days. Instead of trying to manifest more discipline, the objective must shift toward conserving the discipline we already have. Successful individuals do not possess an infinite battery. Rather, they are exceptionally protective of the limited charge they are given each morning. They structure their environments to minimize the need for choice, eliminating distractions before they ever have a chance to tempt the mind. They understand that every unnecessary decision, whether it is deciding what to wear, what to eat, or what task to work on next, is a direct leak in their energy reservoir. By recognizing that willpower is a scarce asset, we can stop treating our daily routine as a test of moral strength and start treating it as a problem of energy management. True productivity is not about forcing yourself to do hard things when you are exhausted. It is about building a system that requires as little willpower as possible to get the job done. If the ultimate limitation of the human mind is that willpower is a finite resource, then the ultimate solution is the biological transition known as the basal ganglia shift. When we look at people who achieve extraordinary things day after day, year after year, it is easy to assume they are trapped in a state of perpetual struggle, constantly forcing themselves to do things that ordinary people find too difficult. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the human brain. The secret to sustainable, high-level performance is not about enduring constant friction. It is about systematically migrating your daily actions out of the part of the brain that feels friction and into the part of the brain that runs entirely on autopilot. This is the profound difference between conscious discipline and automatic habit, and it represents a literal physical relocation of data inside your head. To understand this shift, we must look at the two radically different systems competing for control over your behavior. The first system is housed in the prefrontal cortex. This is the home of your executive functioning, your conscious awareness, your logic, and your long-term planning. It is the part of you that sets goals, writes down a new routine, and decides that tomorrow will be different. While the prefrontal cortex is incredibly smart, it is also incredibly inefficient. It requires massive amounts of metabolic energy, and as we know, its power source drains rapidly. Every time you have to think about what you are doing, weigh your options, or force yourself to start a task, you are running on the prefrontal cortex. This is why starting a new routine feels so painful. Your brain is actively working overtime to process the high friction environment of a new behavior. The second system resides deep within the center of the brain in an ancient primitive structure called the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia does not care about your 5-year plan, your career goals, or your health. It cares about efficiency and survival. It functions as an internal automation machine, constantly looking for patterns of behavior that it can turn into hardwired routines to save energy. When a behavior is handed over to the basal ganglia, the brain stops actively participating in the decision-making process. The mental friction entirely disappears. Think about the act of driving a car. When you first learned to drive, your prefrontal cortex was overwhelmed. You had to consciously think about the steering wheel, the gas pedal, the mirrors, and the traffic all at once. It was exhausting. Today, however, you can drive a familiar route for miles and realize you do not even remember the drive. That is the basal ganglia at work. It took a highly complex, dangerous set of actions and turned it into a single low-energy automatic program. The entire objective of building a bulletproof routine is to consciously guide your desired behaviors through this exact same neurological migration. You want to take high-value, high-effort activities like writing, exercising, analyzing data, or meditating and move them from the high-cost prefrontal cortex to the zero-cost basal ganglia. When this shift occurs, you no longer need inspiration or motivation to execute your routine. You do not wake up and have a debate with yourself about whether you feel like working out or working on your business. The debate is over before it even begins because the behavior has become as deeply ingrained and thoughtless as brushing your teeth before bed. You just do it, not because you are forcing yourself, but because your brain has chosen the path of least resistance, which is now your routine. Achieving this shift requires a fundamental acceptance of the time and consistency needed for neurological rewiring. The brain will not automate a behavior after a few days. It requires repeated, predictable repetition under the exact same conditions before the basal ganglia takes ownership of the loop. Every time you perform the routine without breaking the chain, you are strengthening the physical neural pathways that make the next iteration easier. The transition is often invisible at first, but over time, the mental load begins to lighten. The very tasks that used to require a massive pep talk and an empty schedule eventually become the things you do without a second thought. By focusing your energy on driving this structural shift rather than just trying to survive the day, you stop fighting a losing battle against your own biology. You stop relying on the fragile, temporary spark of human willpower and instead leverage the permanent, unstoppable machinery of human habit. The transition of a behavior into the automatic realm of the basal ganglia is not a random occurrence or a matter of luck. It is governed by a precise, predictable neurological mechanism known as the habit loop. If we want to master our daily actions, we must first master the anatomy of this loop. Every single choice we make, every routine we repeat, and every destructive vice we struggle to break operates on a three-part cyclical framework: the cue, the routine, and the reward. This loop is the fundamental currency of human behavior. When most people attempt to build a new routine or overhaul their lives, they commit a fatal strategic error. They focus almost entirely on the routine itself, completely ignoring the invisible psychological architecture that brackets the action on either side. The routine is simply the behavior you wish to perform or change. It is the workout, the writing session, the healthy meal, or the hours spent deep working. But human psychology does not initiate a routine out of a vacuum. Every routine requires a trigger known scientifically as the cue. The cue is the environmental, emotional, or situational spark that tells your brain to drop into automatic pilot and let the habit loop take over. A cue can be a specific time of day, a particular location, an emotional state, the presence of certain people, or immediately preceding action. Without a highly visible, unambiguous cue, a new routine remains a floating concept in the conscious mind, requiring massive amounts of scarce willpower to initiate. If you tell yourself you will study when you have time, your brain never receives the environmental green light to start. The brain needs a clear, predictable anchor to signal that it is time to transition into the desired state of focus. On the other side of the routine lies the most critical and frequently misunderstood component of the loop: the reward. The reward is the neurological payoff, the immediate hit of dopamine or sense of relief that tells your brain, this behavior was successful, it reduced tension or created pleasure. We should absolutely remember to do this again next time. The human brain is a deeply adaptive organ designed to maximize reward and minimize discomfort. If a routine does not culminate in a perceived reward, the brain interprets the activity as a waste of metabolic energy and refuses to hardwire the loop into the basal ganglia. This is precisely why modern fitness journeys fail so early. A person forces themselves through a grueling workout, finishes feeling exhausted, judges their body harshly in the mirror, and goes to sleep miserable. There is no positive neurological reward in that sequence, therefore, the brain actively resists repeating the loop the following day. To build a bulletproof system, you must stop treating behaviors as isolated events and start deliberately engineering the entire loop. You must treat the cue and the reward as the primary targets of your strategy. If you want a behavior to stick, you must make the cue incredibly obvious and impossible to ignore. You must structure your immediate physical surroundings so that the trigger is staring you in the face. Simultaneously, you must consciously attach an immediate, intrinsic reward to the completion of the task. This reward does not need to be a grand indulgence or a counterproductive treat. It can be as simple as checking a box on a visual tracker, allowing yourself a specific moment of rest, or consciously taking 30 seconds to savor the feeling of competence and completion. By taking control of the cue and the reward, you shift your role from a passive victim of your habits to an intentional architect of your mind. You begin to realize that bad habits are not a sign of personal failure, but rather the result of a highly efficient habit loop that has been accidentally optimized for the wrong rewards. When you align your desired daily actions with this natural tripartite chemistry of the brain, you no longer have to drag yourself across the finish line through sheer force of mental agony. The loop itself begins to generate its own momentum, pulling you forward naturally into the automatic execution of your highest potentials. Understanding the anatomy of the habit loop provides us with the blueprint for change, but the practical execution of that blueprint requires a tactical strategy known as habit stacking. The greatest hurdle to establishing a new routine is the sheer friction of the empty space. When we attempt to introduce a completely new behavior into our day without an explicit structural anchor, we are forcing the brain to create a cue out of thin air. This requires conscious planning, constant self-reminding, and an immense draw on our limited reservoir of mental energy. Habit stacking bypasses the psychological friction by leveraging a fundamental rule of human biology. It is infinitely easier to attach a new behavior to an already existing, deeply established neural pathway than it is to build a brand new pathway from scratch. Every single day, you already execute dozens of complex behaviors entirely on autopilot. You wake up, you pour a cup of coffee, you brush your teeth, You check your phone, you put on your shoes, and you drive to work. These are not just random actions, they are highly stable, deeply ingrained neurological highways carved into your basal ganglia through years of repetition. When you perform these actions, your brain requires zero willpower. Habit stacking is the intentional act of anchoring your new, desired routine directly onto the back of one of these existing, unstoppable momentum trains. Instead of declaring a vague intention such as, I am going to start meditating every day, you create a highly specific structural contract with yourself. After I pour my morning cup of coffee, I will sit on the couch and meditate for 5 minutes. In this precise formulation, the established habit, pouring the coffee, acts as the unshakable cue for the new habit. You are no longer relying on your memory, your mood, or your motivation to trigger the behavior. The environment and your own routine trigger it for you. The pouring of the coffee becomes the biological green light that tells your brain exactly what to do next, eliminating the paralysis of choice. The brain no longer has to ask itself when, where, or how to begin. The sequence is predetermined, linear, and completely predictable. This method works because it respects the natural associative property of human memory. Our minds naturally link experiences together, and by deliberately pairing a new behavior with an old one, we inherit all the momentum and stability of the original habit. To maximize the effectiveness of this strategy, the selection of the anchor habit must be incredibly precise. The existing habit must be a rock-solid, non-negotiable part of your daily life, and it must share a logical or emotional alignment with the new behavior you wish to introduce. For example, if you want to build a routine of writing down your daily priorities, stacking it after a chaotic event, like walking through the front door from work, is likely to fail, because that anchor carries too much unpredictability. Instead, stacking it directly after you open your laptop at your desk provides a clean, highly contextual transition. You are effectively using the closing momentum of one action to launch the opening sequence of the next. Furthermore, habit stacking allows you to build entire chains of highly productive behaviors that run completely on autopilot. Once the first link in the stack becomes securely fastened to the anchor, it can serve as the anchor for a third behavior, and that third behavior can trigger a fourth. You can design an entire morning or evening routine where one action naturally cascading into the next, completely removing the need for conscious decision making for hours at a time. By organizing your day around these intentional psychological anchors, you protect your prefrontal cortex from decision fatigue. You stop treating your goals as isolated chores that you have to remember to do, and instead integrate them seamlessly into the natural, flowing rhythm of who you already are. The final and perhaps most liberating truth of behavioral science is that the grandest of human achievements are not born from grand, heroic actions, but from the deliberate optimization of the starting line. When we look at a massive goal, whether it is writing a book, losing 50 pounds, or building a successful business, our natural inclination is to match the size of the ambition with an equally massive amount of initial effort. We believe that a huge transformation demands a huge, dramatic leap on day one. This mindset forces us to design routines that are incredibly demanding, complex, and intimidating. We tell ourselves that we must work out for 2 hours every day, write 3 chapters a single night, or completely overhaul our entire lifestyle overnight. But by focusing so intensely on the magnitude of the finish line, we accidentally maximize the psychological friction required to simply begin. The human brain is fundamentally wired to avoid sudden, drastic changes in energy expenditure. When you present your mind with a massive, daunting task, your internal survival mechanisms immediately flag it as a threat to your comfort and energy reserves. This triggers a wave of profound resistance, procrastination, and anxiety before you even start. The secret to bypassing this natural neurological defense system is to drastically lower the barrier to entry so significantly that it becomes completely impossible for your mind to say no. You must stop trying to optimize the entire performance and instead focus your energy entirely on optimizing the first 2 minutes of the behavior. If your goal is to build a consistent gym routine, your primary objective should not be the grueling workout itself. Your goal should be the simple act of putting on your running shoes and walking out the front door. If your goal is to write a book, your daily requirement should not be 1,000 words. It should be writing one single sentence. By drastically reducing the scope of the initial step, you completely disarm the brain's resistance. Writing one sentence or putting on your shoes requires virtually zero willpower, meaning you can execute the action even when your mental battery is completely empty, when you are exhausted, and when you have absolutely no motivation. This approach shifts the definition of success away from the intensity of the work and places it squarely on the consistency of the showing up. The ultimate goal in the early stages of building a routine is not to achieve perfect results, but to master the art of showing up. A habit must be established before it can be improved. If you cannot master the simple ability to consistently get to the starting line, you will never have the opportunity to optimize the rest of the race. What makes this strategy so profoundly effective is the hidden physics of human momentum. The hardest part of almost any tasks is the transition from a state of rest to a state of motion. Once you overcome that initial inertia, the internal friction drops dramatically. Once you are already sitting at your desk with your laptop open and you have written that first single sentence, the psychological barrier vanishes. Your brain realizes that the task is not a threat, and the natural desire to complete what you have started kicks in. More often than not, you will find yourself writing for 20 minutes or an hour. But even on the days when you truly do stop after just one sentence, you have still won a massive psychological victory. You have kept the chain of consistency unbroken, and you have reinforced the identity of someone who executes their routine every single day without fail. When you align your strategy with this principle, you stop treating your goals as a series of monumental mountains that you have to climb through sheer agony. You begin to understand that a truly bulletproof routine is built entirely on a foundation of tiny, boring, easily repeatable micro actions. By shifting your focus away from the intimidating finish line and dedicating your awareness entirely to mastering the effortless starting line, you remove the heavy burden of expectation from your mind. Success stops being a distant, stressful destination that you have to chase and instead transforms into the natural, inevitable, and automatic byproduct of the tiny steps you take right now. When we look closely at the architecture of human greatness, we find that it is not built on a foundation of superhuman willpower or extraordinary talent. It is built on systems. It is built on a deep, unconditional respect for how our brains are actually wired. We must stop punishing ourselves for running out of discipline at the end of a long day and instead start protecting that limited resource. We must stop fighting the friction of our conscious minds and start actively guiding our highest aspirations into the effortless ownership of the basal ganglia. By intentionally engineering our cues and rewards, anchoring new behaviors to the unstoppable momentum of our existing habits, and focusing entirely on the simple victory of mastering the starting line, we change the game completely. The journey to an extraordinary life does not require you to make massive, heroic leaps tomorrow morning. It requires you to make your daily systems bulletproof today. When you align your structure with your biology, you no longer have to wake up every single morning and fight a war against yourself. The struggle ends and the system takes over. You stop chasing success, and instead, you simply wake up every day and allow success to become the automatic, inevitable byproduct of exactly who you are.